Another Saturday night, another Dean Legge show here on Dog Post. Thanks for joining me. Do this every Sunday night. Next Sunday night, going to be talking about the SEC championship game. I may spill into that again tonight too. We'll just see. I think you start talking about the win over Texas A&M, a game that was not as easy as it should have been. It's difficult to win in this league. Teams don't just roll over and die. I thought what Wes Blankenship said on Dog Post last night was actually something that is probably the best way to put it, which is that this team is not in a rhythm on offense at all. I mean, I've seen Jake Fromm run up and down the field from the time he's in high school to college, and they're not in rhythm. And I mean, Jake is one of the reasons why they're not in rhythm, but it's not exclusive to him. They just something's not quite right on the offensive side of the ball. And that's the real concern. I mean, I think that's the only concern right now for Georgia. I mean, Georgia fans can figure out anything to be concerned about. They've been very good at that for a long time. But last night Georgia closed Texas A&M out with the offense. 2 weeks ago, or 8 days ago, it was Auburn that they closed out with the defense. They closed the Gators out with offense. They closed Notre Dame out with defense. Part of it is that these games, where Georgia's the better team, they're not closing teams out the way that you'd like to see them do. For teams like, Clemson, it's hard to judge what you're really getting there, because whereas they could be the best team in the country, it's hard to really prove that because of the schedule they play. Their best win is over Texas A&M. I mean, Georgia has 3 wins better than that. They also have a loss worse than Clemson's got, but at some stage, which is better than the other? For LSU, we'll see what they do against Texas A&M this weekend. I think I feel pretty good that they'll win that game, but I also feel pretty good that I think that they will stick with LSU a little bit, make it a second half game. When you start talking about, I think Ohio State looks like the best team in the country, but they were sloppy on Saturday too, and you get that when you're playing a top 10 team. So the other thing, I'm finding it harder and harder to believe that Alabama gets into the playoff. I mean, first of all, they've got to beat Alabama. I mean, Alabama's got to beat Auburn. I mean, they should do that, but they had one of the trickier games this weekend. Look at Ohio State. They go on the road, but they're a double-digit favorite over Michigan. You look at Georgia, they're almost a 30-point favorite. You look at Clemson going on the road. They're a massive favorite, just like Georgia. Oklahoma's got to play Oklahoma State, so that's tricky. But Oklahoma's deep, far away. Utah's got Colorado. This is Alabama's last game, and they don't just need to win. The narrative is that they don't need to just win; they need to really win. I just think they're a placeholder. It feels like right now, but they got to win the first game anyway against an Auburn team that's limited offensively. It feels like, although playing a little better at the end of the year. But there's nothing wrong with Auburn's defense, so I'm not convinced Alabama wins that game, and they've got everything going against them. I mean, if you look at their situation, if their best win is over Auburn, an 8-4 Auburn team, is that going to be enough to get you in? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I really don't. So, I'm more and more skeptical that Alabama will get into this thing. So if you're Georgia, you've got the Jackets, a team that's just not good. I mean, they won this past week against I can't remember who they played. They weren't good. Whoever it was, another ACC. ACC is bad. It's as bad a conference as we've seen in football in the last 2 decades. It's stunning. I mean, Miami losing to Florida International. You've got North Carolina losing to Appalachian State. South Carolina lost to NC State or App State too, but it's just it feels like the ACC just consistently is just a bad conference. I mean, it's a bellwether school like Miami should never lose to Florida International. I mean, the way that this is not a fair matchup, but the way that Alabama beat Duke's brains in, you're going to see this weekend the only ACC team that's got a shot to win. Of the big three rivalries, I don't know about Kentucky and Louisville, but if you look at the ACC SEC matchups this week, the SEC versus ACC and Tech and Florida, the Florida State Florida game and the Georgia Tech game, I mean, those games are not going to be competitive. I mean, Florida's going to be a top 10 team, 10-2 to end the season. Georgia should probably be 11-1, and their counterparts are disasters. Their in-state rivals are disasters. And South Carolina's a disaster too, so Clemson should win that game pretty easily. But man, lately when they've played Carolina, they have won the games, and sometimes they've won them convincingly. But like last year, they didn't play so hot against Carolina. 2016, they didn't play so hot against Carolina. So kind of Clemson can kick the rock kick a little bit themselves in some of these games. I don't get the impression that they'll lose that game, but hey, if you want to turn the ball over 4 times and press your luck, see how that goes. We've seen that movie before. And then you look at Oklahoma. I have a hard time maneuvering Oklahoma into this thing. We've established that it doesn't have to be the best 4 teams. That's what the rules were last year. This year, I'm not going to sit here and act like Alabama is one of the best 4 teams, because I don't think they are. I don't think they're better than Georgia. Whether Georgia beats LSU or not, that's independent of which of those 2 teams is better. We know which team has the most wins. That's Georgia, the better wins. I mean, I don't know what to say, but if Georgia were to win the SEC championship and win the conference 2 out of 3 years, I don't think there's much debate about, you're going to have 2 conference teams in the fight. Question is, where would people go? Ohio State still has to survive a brutal stretch here. That's not a lot of fun what Ohio State's going through. I mean, they've got to, they just played Penn State, a legit team, top 15 team. They got to go to Michigan, who's playing better for sure. And then they got to deal with probably Wisconsin again, but maybe Minnesota. The shock of all shockers would be Minnesota winning the Big Ten, and all that they have to do there is win 2 games in a row. Now, I don't think they'll win this weekend, but we'll see. The Oregon loss, I feel like as bad as the ACC is, the Pac-12 is that unpredictable. You just can't know what's going to happen. I mean, Mel Tucker last night with a big win over UW. Washington has had a rough year, but Oregon shouldn't be losing to Arizona State. I mean, or Arizona, or a lot of those teams, and that just shouldn't happen if you're a legitimate playoff contender. So that's the part I think that's bad for the Pac-12. Now you got Utah, who has to win against Oregon. Obviously, they had to anyway. But just everything is a little bit cloudy, generally speaking. If you're not in the top 4, I mean, Alabama needs help. Utah needs help. These folks are going to be powerless if Georgia beats LSU. I mean, that would mean they would need Clemson to lose, and they would need Ohio State to lose, or one of the 2 to lose. I mean, are we sure that Ohio State doesn't get in with a loss to a 2-loss Wisconsin team? I mean, I'm not sure that they don't still get in. I mean, they look like for sure one of the best 4 teams. And do you really hold against them an upset loss in the championship game? I don't think I would. But the committee, my issue with the committee, generally speaking, is they've got to figure out what they're going to do. Is it the most deserving, or is it the best 4 teams? Because last year they did not pick the best 4 teams. They picked the 4 most deserving. That's not the same thing. I am certain the Big Ten is going to get in. I am certain the SEC is going to get in. I am 99% sure the ACC/Clemson is going to get in. And then you've got what happens in position number 4. LSU is going to get in one way or the other. I mean, if one loss Minnesota beats Ohio State, then maybe then Ohio State's out, or maybe the Big Ten gets 2 teams in. But you could have some serious chaos in these last 2 weeks. I mean, you could have some serious chaos, and it's not that far or hard to imagine. I mean, if you got Auburn beating Alabama, not that hard to imagine. If you've got Ohio State losing at Michigan, that's sort of the most outlandish one. If you've got Oregon beating Utah, that's not exactly hard to imagine. If you've got more chaos in the Big 12. The hardest thing to imagine is Clemson losing one of these next 2 games as a 3-touchdown or more favorite. That's the hardest thing to imagine. And also, I don't think this would bring less chaos, would be Georgia beating LSU, because you would know then that those 2 teams will go in. The chaos then would be who plays where. So, and that would be dictated. You could figure that out pretty quick. If you're confused or worried why I'm not talking about Georgia Tech and Georgia, look, I've done this a long time, and this would be an upset the likes of which we've seen once or twice. I mean, in 1980, when Tech upset Alabama, that was a stunning event. I think they tied Notre Dame soon thereafter, and then Georgia went down there and won the game at Grant Field. So I just don't see how Georgia Tech, a team that I've seen live, seen play plenty on television, they just do not have the defense, first of all, to stick with Georgia's run game. They may muck it up and make it a competitive game for a little bit, but they're not scoring on Georgia very much. I mean, I don't even know if they're going to score 14 points. Most teams don't. We saw that last night with high-flying Texas A&M. Auburn scored 14. The Gators did. But most teams are not, getting over that, let alone a 3-8 Georgia Tech team that's about to be playing its final game of the season. So I know that the Tech folks want to get a massive upset here, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. It would be a remarkable win. It is also remarkably unlikely. So we'll just see. Stay tuned to Dog Post. Here's Riding Home up here. Go ahead and watch that. It was a really good Riding Home. We got our sound in really good shape video, And then subscribe right there. Thanks for watching Dean Legge Dog Post. We'll see y'all next time.